Let me know once you're ready. Will this be okay, just? Good. Okay. Okay, good afternoon, and welcome to the Dean's Forum. Today, we are going to be having an interesting discussion. As you all know, today's discussion will be on subconscious versus unconscious bias. And let me start by saying that when we talk about bias, we speak of it in psychological and sociological terms. So I'm going to start off by giving in one or two sentences the difference between subconscious, unconscious, as well as conscious state of mind, and allow the panel to engage you on the spectrum of all biases. Subconscious state is between the conscious and the unconscious states of mind. That much we know. The unconscious mind is the deepest stage of one's mind and houses repressed memories, whereas the subconscious mind is easily accessible repository for thoughts. So, do we all have biases? That's the question. The answer is yes, but I will let our distinguished panel shed some light on some of our biases today. So if you allow me, I'm going to introduce our panel, and when I finish introducing them, I'm going to allow each of them a few minutes to give an opening remark and then open it up for your questions, and then they can give answers to those. So I will start off starting from the left side of, or the right side of the view, whichever way the camera captures it. Lee Butler, Director of Institutional Research and Assessment. Lee Butler. And next to Lee will be Dr. Laura Overstreet, Adjunct Faculty Sociology. And Suzy Gary, Associate Professor and Clinical Coordinator, Human Service Provider and Substance Abuse Counseling Program. And next to Suzy is Eddie White, our Program Director, Human Service Provider, Substance Abuse and Counseling. Substance Abuse Counseling, I should say. And then next to Eddie will be Don Caldine, Director of Office of Disabilities. Thank you very much. Welcome the panel, ladies and gentlemen. So in the order I introduce you, if you don't mind giving an opening remark.
It helps when you can see what you wrote. Okay. As humans, we spend our lives embedded in a language, a culture, and a social order. Much like fish in water, we take this embeddedness for granted. It is an existential condition that we never call into question or even think about until it stops working or until we are taken out of our familiar sociocultural context. Our embeddedness ranges from the intimacy of romantic relations to the general anonymity of large events to our participation in nation-spanning activities like voting. The constant throughout our experiences is the presence of others. Despite an ongoing emphasis on individuals in American society, at every turn we experience a need for others as evidenced by our group memberships, intimate primary groups of families, secondary groups of classmates, and the like. The incompleteness of our individuality is further revealed by the adoption of a sociological term into common language, a significant other. Our connections to one another or in our groups are complex, interwoven threads of language and cultural values. It is in our conversations with one another that we find our belonging. We laugh together, we cry together, we explore deep emotions and identities, we share joys and the pain of life in a world where we may not fit in, or we may be other. But the world we live in is not bricks and mortar. Our worlds exist solely in the words we share with one another, in the intersubjective moments where we are neither subjects nor objects, but participants in a sphere of communication, sometimes private, sometimes public, but always involving at least two people using the available forms of communication to build that momentary world, that place where understanding can happen. Infused throughout it are our values, the things our culture deems important or our in-group deems important. The language of culture and values lays the groundwork for the things we can experience and, to a certain extent, how we experience them. They provide us categories to classify the world of experience, to group friends with friends, others with others, and dangers with dangers. By providing us with a means of contextualizing the other, the language of culture and values forms the basis of our biases. Learned through socialization, our biases become reflexive over time. We take for granted that the worldview we form through our cultural lenses and our experiences represents a truth about the world. We act towards others, particularly those who are not included in our groups, from the perspective that we are right, that our perspective is valid, and we have the right to engage the other from that perspective. Ordinarily, our assumptions are benign. However, our biases can overextend themselves when they are based on stereotypes of others, when our beliefs justify prejudice, when our fears justify discrimination. When our actions, sourced in the cultural values and beliefs, begin to cause harm to the other, we have broken the sphere of communication that allows for mutual understanding, mutual respect, and mutual trust. And the chance we will reach beyond differences fades. The only option we have to repair that sphere of communication is engagement. We have to acknowledge our biases, be honest about them, and reach out to the other, intentionally dropping our biases and engaging one another as people, just as human as ourselves.
Thank you.
Eloquently said. I'm brief. My opening statement is I'm worried. I'm very worried. I feel that in an age of information, we know less than ever before. And the type of unconscious biases that surround us are insidious and invisible. And it takes great care and concern and deliberation to move past them, and I'm not sure we want to do it. We being a busy student or someone who's trying to sift through lots and lots of things on their Facebook or any of those items. I feel like we're dumbing down. I hate to say that, but I think you were kind of saying that too, but in a different sort of way. But I'm worried, and you'll see why with these 3 points I have.
Thank you.
I'm Suzy Gary, and I teach in our counseling courses for the substance abuse certificate and the human service providers. So our students have a career goal, desire to be out in the field helping people. And ethically, they can't pick and choose who they want to help. So they're going to be sitting with, a cross-section of people. So this is the idea of bias, prejudice, stereotypes, discrimination, all of the glossary terms that you've been handed to. These are definitely part of what we study, learn, and think about and ponder and prepare our students to work with a range of people and how to be able to do that. And I guess as Dr. Overstreet was speaking, I thought, and I think it's something that the self-awareness, the self-reflection, the pausing, stopping, thinking is something we have to be vigilant about every day. Even if we think we're, oh, I'm not, I'm good friends with so-and-so, it is very insidious and subtle and patient. So I just kind of thought, yeah, it's to be vigilant and that it takes some time to ponder and self-reflect on our own behavior. And there's many facets of this subconscious, unconscious bias and assumptions and ideas or myths that are carried on. So we really want to make this interactive with you all. So with that, I'll pass it on to Mr. White.
Thank you.
I work with Ms. Jerry in the counseling department, and one of the things that I have challenged, or the challenges that I've experienced throughout my practice before coming to Weatherford College was actually my own bias and having to manage the bias that I have towards the people that I work with. And I was fortunate enough to work in the prison system for 8 years as a psychotherapist and diagnostician, and the interesting reality behind that is that you are actually in a saturated group of people that were rejected by society, which would naturally bring out all of your biases. I mean, there was all kinds of charges and all kinds of sentences and all kinds of things that I had to deal with as a clinician working with those people that were incarcerated for numerous different types of incarceration experiences or for charges. And one of the stories that I would have to tell would be before that, I worked with a young man that was about 8 years old, and one of the things that happened is he came into my office and I sat down and it was in his New Year's and I asked him what he got for Christmas. And I was a young counselor at the time, and this little boy said, "You must not know me very well." And it was my first time to ever sit down, and I was just trying to establish rapport. And I said, "I don't know you very well. Tell me what you're talking about." And he said, "I'm Jehovah's Witness, and we don't receive gifts. We don't celebrate Christmas." And immediately I knew that I had actually gone beyond. I'd exposed myself, basically, that I was biased. And the one thing that saved me was my quick-witted thinking. I said, "Well, why don't you tell me more about that? I don't know much about the Jehovah's Witness." And he went into it, and that's the way we established rapport, was him teaching me about that. And it was a really interesting experience. So early on in my counseling experience, I started learning how to manage and how to embrace my bias, actually, rather than to deny that I have it, but to embrace the bias and allow that to define who I am. And it also allowed me to see it as an adventure to challenge those biases that I was able to embrace. So I'm really glad to be here. Thank you.
Very good, thank you.
Excuse me. Dawn Calden, and obviously I work with the Office of Disabilities, so if you also got the glossary or saw, there's several things on here that apply to the students I work with. And we have a law that I have to follow every day in and day out with students, that is a discrimination law and has biases that deal with it day in and day out, which is why Dr. Ebay asked me to be here to set in on that side of it. But I think that many people before me said it, and I think that we all have them inherently, and that we deal with it on a daily basis, and that the point is that we learn from them. That was a great story that you just led right into, and that we learn from it, and we take it and move forward as a teaching point every day, whether it's personally, whether it's professionally, and that we use that going forward. And I learn daily from my students, in the classroom as an adjunct and the students I work with, and I hope that we can all learn from each other here today on this.
Very good, thank you. All right, at this time we are going to open up the floors. If you have any question at all that pertains to our subject of discussion today, please go ahead.
Okay.
In beginning this thing, the term bias became the central issue. And my question is there a synonym for bias that has less negative freight to it? In other words, there are things that we come with in terms of our culture and our foundations that give us something sometimes in common and also defines us as a human being. So can we talk a little bit about where that crossover from propensity to bias may come into play?
Gosh, the words that came to mind for me were your point of view, your worldview, your perspective, your perceptions. Because you're right, it's how we're seeing the world from our own history. So I just thought about that, different points of view, worldviews.
Well, is there value to our worldview? I mean, even though it's different than somebody else's, and can we assume some value to our biases or to our propensities?
In sociology, one of the main perspectives is functionalism, and it suggests that whatever exists is there for a reason. And the reason that I have the viewpoints that I have is because they function for me in my life world. So that has been useful. It is useful to us in order to navigate our daily existence, to be able to move from one task to another, to relate to those who are in the same realm. So it works, it develops because it is important to function, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
But you do reach the point where it creates a barrier to appreciating or respecting another worldview, another perspective. And so, you know, if we were able to see differences on the same level, it'd be great, but we don't.
Mhm.
Instead, there's a hierarchy, and that's the problem. That when the tipping point, you know, moves, that's when it becomes problematic, and then
And
we
that's when
jockey
it-
for position.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
That's when it becomes dysfunctional, because it creates a conflict rather than a communication.
Well, functionalists would call it a disequilibrium.
Mhm.
A disequilibrium. Extending what Dr. Overstreet said, these ideas and beliefs, not only do they help us manage with one another, but they give us a group identity, that they let me know as a member of the group why I'm connected to everyone else in the group. And that's a very powerful thing. It establishes that boundary from within the group to outside the group. Normally, this is a relatively benign thing. We all have different groups, whether they're our primary groups, our families, and all of that. There's this boundary. It's like the first time you ever spent the night with a friend when you were little, and that family did things different than yours and upset the apple cart because you couldn't figure out what was going on. That's our introduction to difference, is whenever we experience another group. So, you know, the boundary maintenance function of our beliefs and ideas give us that cohesion to form a group. And it can be as simple as the family, it can be as complex as a church, it can be as massively complex as a country. As a matter of fact, Condoleezza Rice had a special on PBS not too long ago called American Creed, where she addresses this issue with a historian from Stanford. Given the fact that we are so different, right? Across the board, from sea to shining sea, we're different. What reason do we even have to be a nation? And that's where the American Creed comes in. It's not an identifiable set of characteristics that binds us as a people. It's what we believe in common. So unless we believe in the American dream and in the Bill of Rights and all the different things in the civil religion that has grown up around this country for the last 200 plus years, unless we can identify with that creed, we have no reason to be a country. We have no group. And everything becomes disequilibrium. So the importance of those ideas, the importance of those beliefs cannot be underestimated if you want the group to function as a group.
Can I add one little practical
Sure.
statement? And it's meant a lot to me, especially in looking at ADA. And any bias has the negative effect of not allowing us to tap into resources and talents. So from a productive standpoint, the removal of biases helps us see abilities, possible solutions, talents from you know, any source. And I think that makes a lot of sense. Because we don't always recognize what is potentially there. So it taps into a lot of potential.
Thanks. I appreciate all your responses.
The case in point might be, from what you just said, what's this, we touch it or?
No, it's a speaker. It's a microphone.
Oh, it is really?
Yeah, just keep talking.
Don't touch the microphone. I just happened to see a news story the other day about the little girl, I think she was 14, who finally got selected to be a cheerleader, some school around here, I think, but it was on the local news, and she had some disability. And when she competed against the other girls that competed, she wasn't selected. But when she was competed against the standards or something, she met all the tests or whatever it was and did well. But she couldn't compete against the other girls because they were not disabled. They didn't have the condition she had. So when her mother really went to bat for her, so to speak, and pointed this out, that she testing against the standard, or the other girls was not fair, but testing against the standard, she did everything that the other girls did. So it was one test or the other, and so comparing against the girls was where she didn't do well, but against the standard she did as well as anyone. And so her talents and her abilities were not being fairly compared to that extent. So,
Very good. I can try this.
I'm Peter Climo. I work in the ultrasound department, and I'm a very selfish guy, so I came to this meeting to learn something that will help me. We just started to do the interviews for the applicants for next year, and just when I read the reminder about the meeting today, I realized that probably when I do my evaluations of them, we have a set of questions. We do a 15-20 minutes interview with each one of them. But certainly there are biases that have served me well, and my colleagues too, in selecting these people. Nonetheless, those are biases. Those are our experiences, who would make a good candidate and a good sonographer based on our experiences. So I believe that yes, we do have positive biases. So I have two questions for the group. One is that certainly a negative bias is prejudice. If you would have an idea what other negative biases we can deal with. But the more difficult one for me to answer on my own, and I don't know how easy it will be for you, is could you please, each one of you, give me a subconscious and an unconscious bias of yours that you are aware of?
Anybody want to take on that? Subconscious or unconscious bias of yours?
I'll take it on.
Okay.
Let's see. But I have to confess that I reviewed the subconscious, and I don't find that as meaningful. Because to me, the subconscious it's there, but it'll come out quickly. If the chips are down, I think these come when we start keeping score. And so would you agree with
I agree.
that? Okay, good, because I looked at it and I wanted to make sure that. I think when the chips are down, I might attribute a behavior to gender. Yeah, like if the chips are down, I might say, typical male to my partner. That would be, and then of course go, oh my gosh, how could you do such a thing? I have a great example of one. I give you this resource. This person said that she got on a plane and the pilot came over the speaker and it was a woman and she said, yeah, you go girl, And then they experienced turbulence and she went, I hope she can drive. So that would be subconscious.
That's good.
Okay, and the unconscious, and I'll try to be brief, the unconscious is something I think a lot about today, and that is the difficulty we have in finding objective information. I think that we're embedded in a place where, and I'll give you an example, from technology, we are in a web of one, which means we are surrounded by all of the viewpoints and news items and results on search engines that seem to be applicable to our desires. That's called the filter bubble. I'm really concerned about that. So I know that one's there, but I'm not real sure how to get past it. And it's extremely hard to help students get past it and say, go look on the internet. I say, that's a kiss of death. You're looking in the mirror. Go to our databases. That might be better in research. But so the unconscious bias that I know I have is in a search for something. You and I could search for the same thing, we'd get different results based on our histories of searching. So I know what it is. I don't know what to do about it necessarily, but.
Thank you.
Again, most of the biases that we tend to exhibit are unconscious bias. Our subconscious are not well seated, deep down seated, because it's something that can happen like a knee-jerk reaction. The unconscious mind becomes a little inherent, or maybe sometimes it's tribal or cultural. We tend to lean more to affinity, or similarity. People who share some interest or commonality with you. Say, for example, if you are choosing students in your program, you're looking at the students as they come in, and you are judging those students based on your own standard. Can they be liked by the patient? Do they have certain outward features that can look good for the institution? Are they wearing, are their nose pierced, or are they wearing tattoos all over their body? There are things that we begin to, as a group of people trying to recruit or bring in new people into our system, we are inclined to judge. And the judgment we're passing are more deep-rooted biases or should I say standards that we have created for ourselves. And in doing so, sometimes we overlook the most qualified candidates for the job or for the opportunity, because we have all these sets of so-called norms or affinity or similarities that we are looking for. Yes.
There's actually research to back that up. There was an experiment done where resumes were sent out. The resumes were identical. The only difference was the name. The name was either male, female, or one that would have been stereotypically identified as Caucasian versus African American. And female and African American names got fewer, if any, callbacks. So remove all the demographic information from your applications.
That is
Interesting.
I guess I was just thinking in terms of, different criteria for bias, and I think we think about gender and race and maybe religion. We talked about age, but I spent a lot of time in New York City, and there seemed to be, I call it regionalism, when people would find out, I wasn't from New York, and I'd say Texas, and they'd say you're from the South, and I'd say we're not the South, and certain, assumptions that they would bring on. And then occupationism. My previous career, I was a professional dancer, and I know how hard we work. And but here, maybe my mother-in-law was thinking, oh, they just do arabesque and turns. There was that notion that they weren't very bright or smart or intelligent. And so sometimes, my husband is engineer. Is he a techie or a nerd? Are they a performer? Are they a creative flighty type? Or does that make them more cutting edge? So I think sometimes when we look at people's backgrounds, there can be positive, but it also kind of slant. It's like, oh, well, you were a science nerd, you should get that. So I think little ways that just having more information about each person makes us assume and try to categorize this or put us in a group instead of like, oh yeah, my husband's an engineer who dances, and they go, oh, interesting, or it's like we have sociologists who sings. I mean, we're very varied, but I think there can even be bias in terms of knowing more information about ourselves. So even that way.
good. Yes.
I still would like to follow up on this, that how can I, as a person, become aware of my unconscious biases other than psychotherapy? Is there a way to do that? Because I want to know if I have negative tendencies that prevent me to select people with positive attributes.
Go ahead.
Who are you not around?
I have to think long about the answer.
Just think about the answer. One of the suggestions for overcoming bias that I would share with you, and it's on this resource, and this will help you, is to widen your circle, widen your scope. Be intentional in forming relationships and associations with people whom you don't typically And so the flip side of that is that's probably reflecting some of your biases.
Correct, but that still doesn't tell me how do I become aware of my unconscious biases. I understand that to get rid of some of the subconscious ones, I would have to open up the sphere of people I associate with. But is there a way for me to learn my unconscious biases?
I just don't see that as a relevant distinction. Here's the definition I have. Your background, personal experience, societal stereotypes, and cultural context that have an impact on your decisions and actions without you realizing. Implicit or unconscious bias happens by our brains making incredibly quick judgments and assessments of people and situations without us realizing, and that's what you're saying. So I think they're all rooted there. There may be some that we are more familiar with, we caught ourselves on, that are not so deeply entrenched.
I don't think you're making quick decisions. Y'all are pouring over information and making team decisions, right? Y'all do this as a team, correct? Based off your previous experience, clinical experience, professional experience, grades, etc. It's not a quick knee-jerk reaction, as Dr. Eve said. It might not be as biased as you believe.
Okay.
There may be some bias, I'm not saying that, but it might not be as biased as you believe.
Thank you.
And I would like to say that the beauty of you asking the question is the part of the solution. I mean, the desire to recognize those subconscious and unconscious biases is the solution, to be quite frank with you. And through my self-discovery process, all of my subconscious biases have been discovered as insecurities. Everything that I'm insecure about is I have a bias feeling or a bias idea about. Now, the unconscious part of my bias is actually those unidentified fears that I have that I really don't know exactly why I'm afraid, but I'm afraid. And that can be in the presence of a person, can be in the presence of an animal, can be in the presence of a library. I didn't know how to read at one time, and I was terrified of libraries. I don't know what that was all about. There's too many words in there, I guess. but it's really interesting because simply the question itself implies that you're on the right track.
Thank you.
Can I add something?
Yes.
If you're feeling uncomfortable, that would be a good moment to stop and ask yourself why. If, say, you're looking at somebody's resume, you catch yourself tightening up, not breathing.
No, I don't have
just
that.
feeling uncomfortable. Yeah, but anytime you feel that, then stop and ask yourself why.
Thank you.
That's how we catch a lot of things.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to ask this question of the panel. I'm going to start with you, Don. On our campus, what is the most common bias seen among students with disabilities?
I would have to say probably that if they have accommodations, that they're perceived as not intelligent, or not necessarily that they won't be successful, but that they're not going to be the brightest person in my class, which I will have to say some of the smartest students on this campus are possibly some of my students with disabilities at this point, this semester alone, the last 2 semesters even. And I think there are a lot of teachers who have now, and instructors, that have now seen that and have realized it and will call and just give great feedback or say they're really glad to have this student in the class. And I always say, call and tell that student. I appreciate it, but tell the student. So that's a good feedback to have from the student's perspective. They like to hear it. I mean, it's great for me to hear, but the student wants to hear that. They're the ones who are in the class. I don't have to sit through the class. And I think that is just because we're used to listening to maybe the K through 12 model, which is a different law. And they're served under a law that allows for modification in the classroom and not accommodations. So, well, they get accommodations too, but they can't be modified. They have to do everything everyone else in that classroom is doing that you're doing. And so that is something that we let them know from the moment they walk in our door. And we want them to understand that. It's just a level playing field. They're not getting treated differently. So that is something we want them to know so that you as a teacher don't have to worry about that.
Very good. Yes. Oh, I thought you were listening.
Nice touching.
Let me pass this to you. Let me ask our students, maybe they know of any type of bias that goes on around the campus. Do you have any question about biases that you experience on campus?
Do you? I don't think. I don't know.
Would you want to say something? I'll bring this to
I
you.
have a question for you. You said you're head of the stenography program?
Didn't say that, but yes, I am.
I thought you said something about it.
Yeah,
Okay.
I work in the ultrasound, that's what I said.
Okay.
But yes, you are.
Do you mind saying what some of your biases are that you have?
That's the thing, that my question was trying to say that I would like to be aware of those that might prevent me from being open enough. I'm not aware of them right now. I believe that I'm very open-minded, but I'm pretty sure I have unconscious or even subconscious biases. For example, one of the subconscious ones that I know I have is that for the ultrasound field, we not just tend to think, but we have the experience that usually the younger applicants and students are more successful because they learn the scanning skills faster. We have students in their 30s and 40s, they are kind of slower, noticeably slower in learning those scanning skills. Not that they would not become successful, but that's a bias. You know, I tend to have a bias towards selecting, so if there are two equally good applicants, which is impossible, it's not never equal, then I tend to select the younger one for thinking that has a better rate of success or better chance of being great.
I see. Okay.
We call that contrast effect. Is that what you said? Did you say that in sociology? Wouldn't that be contrast effect? Now, let me address, I want you as a panel, can you address what you would think are some of the biases we have on Weatherford College? Let's talk about Weatherford College. This is Weatherford College and you all work for Weatherford College. So let's start by talking about some of the bias that one can experience or what you have experienced working with your colleagues or students around campus. Any one of you can take up that. It's a general discussion.
Well, I was going to say, I know my students that have legal backgrounds have expressed that that has been a bias they've experienced, that people are reticent to give them an opportunity. Maybe that's not at Weatherford College so much as, of course, out in the workplace if they've had a criminal background.
If you have criminal background, okay. And then, of course, say if you or any of you are sitting in a hiring committee to bring in somebody to work for Weatherford College, and the person revealed to you that they've had some criminal background, and you find them to be the most qualified person for that job, would their criminal history prevent you from hiring them? Even though they're the most qualified, but they just revealed to you, say, I have a criminal background.
They have to be frank and honest and open about what that would be. I don't think that is a preventative case. I think they just have to be open and honest about what it is, and the details, obviously. Can't have a contingency upon what their job duties would be.
But if supposing there is something in the policy with the institution saying that you cannot hire somebody for this sensitive position because of criminal background, how would is that not a bias? But is a cultural or tribal or accepted bias because it's in the policy? How would you address that? What do you think could be done in those regards?
Well, the first thing I would do is ask counsel if that was legal. Yeah. Is it legal to set up a policy of discrimination based on someone's experiences? There may be a sensitive position where it is, but I don't know what that would be. I mean, if our idea of the justice system as rehabilitative and not retributive. Yeah, what is it? Retributive.
Retributive.
Then once a person completes their sentence, completes their obligation to the state or to the people, then it's over. You know, they have rehabilitated, let's move forward. But that's not the way people see it. And if that gets integrated into a policy statement, then I think that's a potential liability.
Could we check? Isn't that part of the hiring process? Don't you fill out something to that effect when you fill out an application? Because I think I did it not that long ago.
Yes?
Is that right? Yeah.
Yes.
So it is there.
It is there.
Okay.
But there is also, I know in our program, we ask about criminal background, but we can't discriminate as a result of criminal background. There's a difference in asking about it, discriminating about it, or being.
Okay, let me rephrase it. Let me change the question another way. Maybe you say you are in a hiring committee to hire a new faculty member, and that you have a group of applicants, and you said that you're looking for somebody with experience. And this one person comes to you and say, look, I just graduated from college. I just finished my master's degree, and they are excellent, credential excellent. And then are you going to say, well, because they don't have experience, you're not going to give them the opportunity. You rather get somebody else who had maybe 4, 5, 6 years experience, but not as qualified as this person. Isn't that bias on its own? But we tend to do that because most jobs will tell you you have to have a certain number of years of experience. How do people get experience when you don't give them the opportunity? That's the question. Can you guys address that, if you don't mind?
Well, I guess you could flip it around and say this person has a lot of experience in developing bad work habits, too. I mean, because they had more years doesn't necessarily mean they are as effective or as apprised of new information or flexible. So that you just spin it around, you know.
Okay. All right.
There is certainly a bias
Yeah.
in that. I mean, you're absolutely being biased.
Okay. All right. Now, let me ask you this, Dr. Overstreet, you in particular, what would you consider the most common type of bias?
Confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is looking for evidence that you're right. It is our common way of knowing. If you're angry at someone, you seek out those who don't like them either to justify your position, right?
That's right.
And it's interesting because as a result, we miss all contradictory evidence. Now, in science is set up to help us overcome confirmation bias, right? But the reality is, in my opinion, my reality is that we tend to think that seeing is believing, but believing is seeing. We look for evidence, we look for studies, we look for our colleagues who've all been publishing together for a long time and maybe using the same data in various iterations. But this is interesting. I want to tell you a little bit about this. Did you know that couples who have a new relationship have a more accurate knowledge of one another than people who've been together 20 years? How could it be? Well, they formed their preliminary observations and then they filter all new things. If the person, this is also called attribution theory, you guys know attribution theory. If I'm in love, when they do something right, it's because they're wonderful. And if they mess up, it was a fluke. When I don't like them, if they do something wonderful, what do they want? If they mess up, you know, of course, they're no good. And so we filter this all the time. One way to get around it, I have to do this. It's I think there's the unsung attention, I suppose, on a prejudice has to do with aging. It could be youth or age. We typically hear about illness and infirmity with aging. Would you agree with that? I would say, I teach lifespan too, so I'm all into aging. And I think that we live in a society that's medicalized aging, and I teach a death and dying class too, and it's very medicalized, and so on. But let me give you an example of one thing I think is effective, and that's a statistical turnaround. Did you know that in 2010, only 3% of the 40.3 million people over 65 were in nursing homes? Did you know that our suggestion by 2030 is that we will have 72.7 million people over 65 in the U.S., and only 3% will be in nursing homes? It's never stated in that way. So when if you find good, sound statistics, turn them over, turn them around. That's a good, I think, good perspective. So that's what confirmation bias, looking for evidence that supports you, and it's writ large in that filtering bubble that I was talking about.
There you go. And then you post it on Facebook so that you look right.
And you like it, and you share it, and you're advertising for the pins already. There's your filter bubble.
Okay. All right. This question is for you, Suzy. What can we do individually to address our subconscious and unconscious bias?
Yeah, I was just thinking, creating that self-awareness, self-reflection. I kind of, in social work, we have social justice, fairness, do no harm, beneficence, doing what's right, and the respect for the dignity of the individual. And with my students, I just encourage them to be curious, to explore. I mean, I do one exercise, it's called First Thought, because we're thinking about quick judgments, and it might be the elderly, and we'll get everything from smelly, no teeth in a nursing home to wise, the purveyors of history, and we look at that and we talk about that, and then identify someone that they had an assumption about, and it was different, just to kind of raise their consciousness about stopping, thinking, self-reflection, self-awareness, and are they treating that person as an individual and respecting the dignity of the individual, and just self-monitoring. And like I said, we have to be vigilant each day. And is that what your question? What could we do individually? I think having these forums to just talk about it raises consciousness, like what Eddie White said, just the idea of, okay, am I being biased and not seeing and doing that? So just continuing to talk about it, and that self-awareness and self-reflection.
And you teach this to your students before you send them out on clinicals, will you?
Yes.
Okay. In a classroom, let's say you have a class. Yes.
Could I add something
Please,
to that?
go ahead.
One of the things that we actually have our students to do in the classroom is to go to different AA and NA and CA and Al-Anon meetings and in the community in order to challenge some of their ideas about what a meeting looks like. And it also exposes them to people that they don't necessarily like, and that don't look like them, and they have different issues and disabilities. Then we also challenge them to search the internet in journals for different types of biases that they may have about movie stars that have been diagnosed with some type of mental illness and are co-occurring disorders, so that they can actually identify that successful people have mental and emotional disorders, that are artists and that are actors and that type of stuff. And we're constantly, that is our whole job, is to challenge their biases through the whole education process and the substance abuse counseling process, because they're going to see so many different people. We were in Austin just the other day, and they were asking me about an Aryan Brotherhood, or asking the panel about an Aryan Brotherhood person that was in their classroom, and they were wondering what they needed to do and what liabilities, and I asked them if you looked at it as a learning opportunity. To have that person to talk to you about what their beliefs are, where they got them, and why they still cling to them, and that kind of stuff, so that the whole group of drug and alcohol counselors will have a better understanding of what the Aryan Brotherhood belief and idea is, not to support them, but to give everybody an opportunity to learn from it, a teaching opportunity. So that's something that I think Ms. Jerry and I do very well, is to embrace opportunities to teach people about bias and about their bias whenever they're sitting down across from somebody that's not like them at all. They may have serious mental illness and serious issues related to drug and substance abuse and serious legal issues. I mean, we deal with people that are murdered frequently.
Very good. Let me, in that same line of questioning, I say you are in the classroom and you have students, of maybe a student, I should say, not students, a student in your classroom, the very first day of class, while you go through all your rules and regulations, and they turn around immediately and ask you questions. For you, they ask you the same question on what you have just said to the class, and you look at them and wondering if they were paying attention to you or if something else. And then the rest of the students in the class reacted in a certain way, have that same look on that student. Now, you as the instructor, how will you know already that a situation, something has just happened in that classroom? And how would you, as an instructor, diffuse the situation to prevent any further escalation of the bias that other students might have of that student who quickly, just within a few minutes, has displayed some sense that they were not listening to you? So how would you, as an instructor in the classroom, diffuse that?
I would model giving them the information they asked. I would try to model not looking down on them or berating them or seeing them as lesser because their mind might have been somewhere else at that point. I mean, I think that would be more than, what else could I do? I would never, I mean, even, we deal with this all the time, right, with the syllabus. I've always thought that a syllabus isn't like the directory in the front of Dillard's. And if you don't get it, if you don't know where to go in the store, if you went to a sales associate, you wouldn't say, where's the perfume? And they go, didn't you read the directory? So I don't, so I would just give it again, and people don't always get that. And I had a student in the past that was not getting things. It was very obvious, and I've tried to talk to the student on several occasions and offer assistance and all that. And finally it came out, it was really a language barrier. And once the materials were provided, with language, basically a lot of notes, this person is getting it going and whipping it out and sitting up, in the seat. So I guess that's what I would do. I would just say it again. It's okay. It probably wouldn't take that long.
All right. Okay, let's crank it up a little bit more. Now, let's, yes.
Dr. Ebe, I think this is really important because a lot of our students don't know how to get through academics.
Yeah.
And I hear, starting to tattle, but I hear a lot of my colleagues say, they should know this is how you do X, Y, Z. And I'm thinking, how would they know? Who told them? I grew up with a father who was faculty, so I had an idea. You got a piece of paper to drop a course and you went around. Our students know, I think what you're seeing is so valuable because any student, even if their brain took a vacation while you said whatever, or they just don't know, they really need us to be reaching out to them and helping them move through this in a positive way. So I really appreciate you saying that.
Very good.
It's very hard to navigate. This is an artificial
All right,
here,
very good. Still on that line, let's again, in this same classroom, or maybe a different classroom, you have very diverse group of students. And maybe that student who asked that question has autism spectrum, okay? And in this classroom, maybe that student is an international student. Language, English is a second language for them, they didn't get the whole information right. And it could be just any other student, but this classroom is very diverse, and this comment happens. Let's assume this comment or this line of questioning came from a student who is an international student, who's, you know, English is a second language, or this student who has autism? How would you, as an instructor, diffuse that situation, or to make sure that students continue to feel comfortable in the classroom? Anybody can take on that?
I guess I'm just clarifying, we know that the student has autism?
Yeah, the student, okay, the student,
Okay.
maybe.
He has given you his accommodation.
The father, yeah. Now,
We're gonna
yes.
pretend.
Anyone of you can answer that question to those of you know.
Remind me, because I haven't had one in a while, but do those forms actually say what the condition is?
No.
So we don't know the student
You
has
just know he has accommodation.
this or that condition necessarily. I mean, we could probably guess,
Yeah.
Yeah.
but the student, unless the student
Yeah.
tells us,
Unless they, yes.
or,
Right.
and then oftentimes in online classes, many times, in fact, just today, or
Yep, they did.
yesterday,
Yeah,
I got an email from a mother saying,
yep, they did.
it wasn't her,
Yeah.
it was her son
Right.
who has the condition. The student is the mother, and she says her son was coming to the hospital and has to have surgery tomorrow. So she was asking for accommodation, actually, for the final exam. She's the student, but her son's the one having, has this condition. But I'm just saying that it's not always the case that we, the instructor, would know that a given student has a given condition based on, because all we get is the accommodation
Paper.
plan for the student.
As a matter of fact, part of the bias comes when you start trying to diagnose someone.
Yeah, we just
I have
know
to
that
fight it all the
student
time.
needs
I mean, That's what I
testing
do. I mean,
or whatever, yeah.
The diagnosis.
Okay, I was.
And we can't ask,
Yeah.
right?
Okay,
Don't ask
Well,
them.
just offhand, I'm thinking, we have office hours. Say, come to my office and let's talk about it further, or I can go over it with you, whatever it is. Our time, our office hours are for them, so that's also another thing you can do, or speak to me after
One of
class.
the things I do is I'll say to the student, if I can help you in any way, I don't know what all you might need, there may be things I can do that aren't on the accommodations. Come talk to me and let me know how I can help you be a success. And that gives them an opportunity, if they want to, they can tell me whatever.
Are you saying this in front of the whole class, or are you saying this?
No, I'm saying that to the student individually.
Individually. But I'm saying this, when that student asks that question in the class, and every other students in the class look at that student as if they've done something wrong, and that student all of a sudden feel embarrassed, and you as the instructor, how can you diffuse that situation?
Good question. That's what I tell them. Good question.
Yeah.
I like that
You
question.
can say, hold on, that is a good question. Something to that effect that pulls them in a more equitable situation. I think it depends a little bit on what's going on, but something like that, yeah.
And take responsibility.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah,
you for
yeah.
asking. I must not have been clear.
Thank you.
Go on and
Yeah,
do some
yeah.
more.
The talking
And
pillow.
take that responsibility.
Let's have.
I think that most of you guys probably do this naturally, but I don't think that you handle that question any differently than any other student in the room.
Right.
I usually assume I wasn't clear enough the first time.
Right.
Okay, and this is just common kindness.
Mhm.
And I will answer the question again, and then I also point to it so they can mark it, circle it, highlight it. It's something that they were curious about, or maybe they have other questions that they aren't able to vocalize just right then, or they're insecure about the course to begin with. So they're just feeling nervous or whatever. But I think you just assume that it was your miscommunication, not the students. Because I never want to make any student in my room feel uneven or unequal. But
Often they'll preface it by saying, this is a stupid question, or I know you just said this. And I will usually try to respond something like, your brain just took a vacation when I said the one thing you need to know. And I would say, my brain does it too, I hate it. Don't you hate that when that happens? So I try to, I'm just like you. I'm not always paying attention. You know why I sit by the window? I'm looking out the window.
Do we all believe that there exists, we do have unconscious bias that exist in education settings? Do we all believe that?
Absolutely.
Okay. And because I know in the healthcare field, we do have that. One of the classic examples I will always say in the healthcare is, and I teach this to my students in my AMP class, is the way you present your symptoms, we judge you based on that. So if you were to walk into my clinic and tell me that your stomach hurts, and I'm going to look at you, knowing fully well that you don't understand what the stomach is and what your abdomen is. So yeah, immediately, the next line of questioning will probably be, how do you know it's your stomach? You say, well, because I just know it's my stomach. Then that tells you there that the student doesn't, I mean the patient I should say, doesn't know, they're not that well astute. So you don't want to waste too much time in further interrogation. You can just maybe probably ask when do they have the aches and pains, and when was the first time they experienced a few questions. Then you will run this battery of tests to help, hoping that those battery of tests you run will give you a diagnosis. But if that patient comes in and tells me my abdomen hurts, I know they know something for them to even describe it as abdomen. And then of course, a lot of times we will ask you, say, can you put a finger to it? I don't know. Then that tells you again that they don't know much. Or already you have judged that patient that in terms of their level of understanding of the body. So those are deeply rooted things that we do. It's an unconscious bias, but unless your colleague points it out to you, you say, oh, but we do have the diagnostic battery of tests we run to help you achieve your goal without wasting too much time on such patients. That exists. So in an educational setting, we know that this is a commonality that goes on around, in every setting we talk about, we tend to classify certain group of students, right? Maybe the student could be first generation, parents never went to college, they don't know how to navigate through the college system, and those students come to you. If you, as an educator, you don't have that emotional intelligence to be able to say, okay, I will answer their question and help them to navigate through the process, you could get biased. And that there again is a problem. Or maybe it's racial thing. You have an institution that is 99% Caucasian and only 1% Hispanic and African American. And you have those students in your classroom or around the campus setting. Sometimes you, as an educator, don't know you have that deep-rooted in you. You already judge who is going to pass your class and who is not going to pass your class. Can we, I'll give you guys time, can we just give a general description, a general comment on these issues or the type of biases that exist within an educational institution? Whether, that is, I'm not just talking about classroom setting of students, how about your colleagues, people you work with? How many times have you had that listening problem? Somebody is talking to you, you are in a meeting, you are giving all these instructions and directives, and people you are talking to are not listening to you. Then all of a sudden you stop, somebody else starts saying the same thing you are saying, everybody says, oh yes, that's a good point. But you have just said that. You have just said that. Can you talk to that, please? Because I'm talking from experience. Anybody want to address some of those issues? I'll give you guys a few moments to talk about it. Any type of biases you have noticed?
Okay, I have a couple that I would just say briefly, mention briefly. And one is in the educational system, I really do think there's an age bias. Mm-hmm. I think that when I hear a colleague refer to their kids in their room, I'm thinking, I have students who are of all ages, and all of those are important, and so I think that's a bit short-sighted. Mm-hmm. And the other is that I think there's a real class bias. I think that we look for the language and You know, the middle-class euphemisms is an indicator of intelligence, and there's so much to learn about intelligences, and I value a working class, different perspective so very much, and I think that, you know, I mean,
Sure.
we think smart is quick. A lot of cultures know it's a long, deliberate answer.
That's
it's not, you know, right? So anyway, those are two.
Very good.
Another thing, I've noticed that I'll have a bias towards my students who show up for class and who do their work. So if I'm grading essays, I like to just have it where there's a number or something where I can distinguish that person's paper. Because if I see, I've noticed just myself when I'm grading, if it's students who are good students, they show up, they do their work, they're not tardy, they don't have hard luck stories. There's just a bias in me wanting to grade their essay easier. But it should be graded across the board. I use a rubric, and I try to make it where I don't see names. That way, I'm not judging those people that I know to be good students better than I do the others, which is just kind of more fair across the board.
Very good. I do the same thing.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other person want to say something?
I think one of the issues with all biases, they all boil down to our perceptions. And we spend far too much energy interacting with those perceptions to the person in front of us. So when the student comes into class and they present in a particular way, we judge them. We have that perception, and we tend to interact with the perception, ignoring anything that the student does on their other side. So being aware of that, understanding our biases are tied to our perceptions, or tied to our cultures, or tied to all of that stuff that makes us who we are, gives us some leverage to say, okay, I'm going to stop talking to this perception I have of you. I'm going to talk to you now. More importantly, I'm going to listen to what you have to say.
Very good. On that note, let me say that emotional intelligence, which we started the whole of this Dean's Forum with several months ago, we are going to come back in the fall and see how emotional intelligence could help us overcome some of the biases we have. And that is an assignment, a homework for everyone in here. So look how emotional intelligence can help you overcome your biases. And if we don't have any other question at this time, we are up, our time is up. I would like you to thank our panel for me for doing a wonderful job. We do have, this year, 1 hour is just a very short time to talk about the subconscious and unconscious bias. But that's the only time we have. If you have any other question, you can always send it via email to me. I'll forward it to the panel. They will respond back to you via email. Or you can contact them directly, and they will be able to respond to your questions. Again, thank you very much, and I will see you again in the fall.
Resources for you, what you would like. Some really good things to look at. Yes.